Hey guys, Fahad here from the Team Fighting Fit podcast, and here we are on another episode. And today we're going to delve into mindset. And mindset is an absolute minefield because there's so many things we can discuss, but it's also one of the most interesting topics that I come across. I absolutely love learning about, researching, reading. Anything to do with mindset is just my thing. I absolutely devour all content when it comes to mindset, primarily because I want to show up as the best version of myself, and I want to become the best version of myself as possible. And I know that my mindset is going to dictate how I show up, what I do, and how I act. So much so that this week I've started working with a mindset coach who I've invested a lot of money into to help me uncover limiting beliefs, but also to help me show up, like I said, as the best version of myself. And I put a question out there to my clients this week. If I was to sort of cover mindset, what kind of topics would people want to hear about? So today I want to just touch on a couple of things on this short podcast. Number one, addressing some of these questions that clients have asked me to address. And number two, telling you what it really takes to achieve your goals and the kind of mindset you need to bring to the table in order to achieve your goals. So the first question that I got asked, or kind of like the theme of the questions I got asked, were really around sort of like, why do we do things? Why do we self-sabotage? Why is it that we binge eat, or we eat foods that we shouldn't be eating even though we know we shouldn't be eating them? Or why do we reach for food, and how can we sort of like have better habits or reach for the dumbbell rather than the food, as one of my clients asked? And ultimately, we have to understand that we've been wired a certain way, and your brain is wired a certain way, and your brain doesn't care whether you've got six-pack abs or whether you're 30% body fat. Your brain has one primary directive that it must live by and run by, and that is to preserve you as an individual. That is to preserve your life, and that is to keep you alive and to keep you safe. Now, it doesn't know certain things are going to be good for you or bad for you. It just knows based on programming, based on what your current conditioning is, based on past experience, what has kept you safe and alive up until this point. So if you have been, for example, in a relationship where on the outside, most people looking at that relationship will say you're in an abusive, toxic relationship, but you're still in that relationship because it feels safer for you to be in that relationship, because the certainty of what that relationship provides you is far more predictable and far more safer than the unpredictability of being out of that relationship. The brain therefore keeps you in that relationship because that's what it knows better, and that's what it knows is going to provide you with safety, because hey, you've not died yet. So it's similar with your bad habits, your bad traits, and the things that are holding you back in life, especially when it comes to your nutrition and when it comes to bad diets, etc. So how do we sort of like address this, and why do we do this? So one of the things that I read recently, and I can't remember what book it was from, but it was really poignant, and it's basically stated that if we have a bad habit or we have a trait that we don't like, for example, say we procrastinate, it's not that the habit itself is bad. We have to actually be grateful that the habit exists in the first place, because it's protecting us from something. Even procrastination, even so-called laziness, it's protecting us from something. So we have to understand, what is it protecting us from? What is the fear or the uncertainty or the threat that our habits and our routines are protecting us from? That's the first thing. We must become aware of that. And sometimes these fears or these threats, they're totally irrational. They're totally irrational because we don't live in a time where we could be threatened by saber-toothed tigers. And a lot of our programming comes from past sort of like generations, going all the way back to sort of prehistoric Stone Age Neanderthal human beings, where we are still afraid of threats to our life, like animals or, dangerous situations such as being alone from our tribe. And these things keep us stuck in situations where we know we shouldn't be stuck in, even though logically and from a reason perspective, we know certain things are bad for us. We keep going to do those bad things because they've kept us safe up until this point. So the first thing and the most important thing is to become aware of what it is that is holding us back. What are these bad habits? And then try to sort of understand, hey, what is this protecting me from? For example, if you make sales calls and you procrastinate, and you know you should be making sales calls, you should be hitting certain numbers, but you start to think things like, oh, I won't call them now, they're probably having lunch now, so this is now not a good time to call them. And then an hour later you say, oh, well, I really should call them, but they've just finished their lunch break and they're probably really busy with work right now, I'll call them in a couple of hours. And in a couple of hours, because they think, oh, you know what, they're probably winding down to go home now, so maybe now is not the right time to call them. And then maybe you'll call them when they get home, and then you think, oh, they're home now, they're probably chilling with their family, I'll call them tomorrow. And then tomorrow the same cycle repeats itself. You might be familiar with that. And that is the fear of rejection. And that procrastination is keeping us from something that we fear, and that fear being rejection. So it's keeping us safe from something. We have to start to understand what are these things that we're being kept safe from. And when we can start to sort of like discern that and logically understand it, we can start to create strategies to overcome these fears and rationalize and start to move forward in the direction that we want to go in with more stability, knowing that we're not going to be in a fearful situation where we're under threat, but also with power. And that's something that I think is really important to understand. The second thing we have to understand when we do things that we're not should be doing is dopamine. So there are certain things that we do in our life that release dopamine. Now, dopamine is the reward hormone that your body, basically, if you do something that your brain or your body likes, it wants more of it. So it releases a hormone called dopamine, and that dopamine is addictive and it makes you feel good. And you get addicted to that dopamine and you want more of it and you want more of it and you want more of it. So one of the things about food is, especially certain foods like sugary foods or sweet foods or foods that are generally processed, they can elicit a dopamine response that's quite high. And you get addicted to it, so you want more of that dopamine. Now, one of the clever things, or one of the interesting things about dopamine is 50% or more of that is produced at the gut. So if your gut is bad in the first place, you're not producing the right amount of dopamine anyway, and the neurotransmitters are going to look for the brain is going to look for those neurotransmitters from somewhere else. You're going to constantly do things that's going to give you that dopamine. Doom scrolling, eating junk food, watching things you should be watching on the internet, or doing things that you shouldn't be doing in day-to-day life that could be bad for you, but it's giving that dopamine fix. So dopamine addiction is another reason why we could be doing things that are sabotaging our goals. And again, once you become aware of these things, especially things like dopamine addiction, you can start to create strategies to look into how you can replace that dopamine addiction with something else, and how you can sort of like create the discipline or create sort of like the right mindset, or even bypass those bad dopamine addictions with better dopamine addictions or better dopamine releases such as exercise, etc., which is far better for you than eating junk food. So that's the other reason. And then another thing that could be causing you to have bad habits is the habit loop. So habit loops are basically when we are doing something that's a habit. Habits are responses to a trigger. So in a very basic habits loop, there are complicated versions of habits loop, but a basic version of habits loop is what we call trigger, response, reward. So you'll have a certain trigger, and that trigger could be it's 2 o'clock, and usually at 2 o'clock you have a cigarette break. And the response at 2 o'clock is to go outside and light up a cigarette and have a smoke. And the reward Well, what you're getting from that is a break from work. You're having a little bit of time for yourself. You're going outside in the fresh air, although you're polluting that fresh air with a cigarette, and then you're taking a big deep breath. And I love how Tony Robbins says that, you know, sometimes cigarette addiction is just the body's need for taking a big deep breath, right? You know, when you have a cigarette, you're like, big deep breath, right? Your body's craving air or oxygen, and unfortunately the nicotine doesn't help because that's an addictive substance. But here's the thing, you've got a trigger, you've got a response, and the reward you're looking for, again, it goes back to dopamine. You've got a reward that you're looking for, and that reward is then backed up through a dopamine response or a dopamine release. So once you're aware of the trigger, the response, the reward, we can start to understand, well, habits are just a loop of trigger, response, and reward. What can we do to change the response so that we're getting a similar reward, or a reward that doesn't necessarily mean we have to have the same response in the first place to elicit that reward, so we could replace that response with something that is far more powerful and empowering and better for us than the bad habit with a better habit. So for example, with the case of smoking, could just be going outside and having a nice walk and taking a few big deep breaths and doing some breath work outside. That could potentially replace that response, still give you much of the reward. Now I appreciate there's nicotine addiction and things like that, and that's something that has to be addressed as well. But it gives you an idea of whole idea of the habits, response, reward loop. And when you've got a habit and you want to break it, it's important to understand the trigger, response, the reward loop. So what's the trigger? How do I respond to that trigger? And what is that response rewarding me with? And once you understand that and you become aware of that, it's now easier to unravel these habits and replace them with better habits. And remember, habits are just repetition. They're repetition over time. And there is a process to developing good habits. And we've got that process nailed down in our mentorship program, where we work with our clients on developing 5 key habits that will help them empower their lives for not only health and fitness, but for just the way they show up and doing and everything they do, based on, you know, books like James Clear's Atomic Habits and a few other books and research, etc. And if you are interested in finding out more about how the mentorship program can help you, just get in touch with me, just DM me or message me privately or email me or however you want to contact me. Tell me you want to find out more about the mentorship program, and I'll explain how the mentorship program is designed to help you create new empowering habits in a scientific, proven way, where my clients that have gone through that program have, you know, got rid of loads of bad habits and replaced them with empowering habits, and they're just thriving. So those are a few areas in which you can understand why you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing, and what to do about them. But when it comes to mindset, and I wanted to share this anyway before I even ask the questions to my clients, one of the things I really want to share is what you have to bring to the table when it comes to transformation. See, a lot of people will come to a coach and they will come in one of two phases. They're either pushed by their goals. In other words, they have a goal that they want to achieve and they want to really achieve it, and they're driven and they're motivated and they want to achieve that goal. Or they're pulled by their circumstances. In other words, their circumstances have gotten so bad, the pain of the circumstance outweighs the pain of taking action, and they need to change that. See, going back to Tony Robbins, and for those of you who don't know who Tony Robbins is, he is a motivational speaker. He's probably one of the top motivational speakers of all time, and he learned from the GOAT himself, Jim Rohn. And Tony says we do things for one of two reasons. We either do it to gain pleasure or avoid pain, and we do more to avoid pain than we do to gain pleasure. And that's really important because, for example, you don't have to be a car enthusiast to appreciate that a Ferrari is a nice car, right? And we'd all like to have a Ferrari. I mean, most of us would, even if we aren't materialistic or we don't really like cars, it'd be pretty cool to own a Ferrari. And if you're not into materialism, find something that you do appreciate and relate to in this example. But I'm going to stick with the Ferrari example for now. It would be really cool to own a Ferrari. So why don't loads of people have Ferraris? Why are they such a rare car to see in the world outside? And yeah, it's because they're really expensive. But it's not because they're really expensive. It's because the work that you need to put in, the person you need to become, and the stuff that you need to do in order to warrant having the financial resources to be able to afford a Ferrari, the pain of achieving that transformation is more than the reward you're going to get, right? So if the pain to achieve the goal is higher than the actual reward you're going to get from the goal, your brain is going to say, whoa, slow down a little bit there. Like, do we really want this? This is going to hurt. This is going to cause you to go through a lot of pain and a lot of change. And we don't like change. I've already told you the brain wants to keep you safe and maintain equilibrium, and doesn't like situations that are perceived as a threat because they're alien to you and they're unknown to you. And it'll keep you in situations where they might not be comfortable for you, but at least you know them, so you stay with them. And that's pretty much why this pain-pleasure response exists, and why it's important to be aware of this pain-pleasure response. So if you really want a Ferrari badly enough, what you've got to do is you've got to create the pleasure and the desire of the Ferrari being more than the pain. And once the desire to own the Ferrari and to drive it and what it means to you and why you want it badly enough is worth more than it is more than the pain of achieving it and the transformation and the person you need to become and the work you need to put in, etc., then you're more likely to achieve a Ferrari. And it's the same with fitness. You've got to come in with an attitude of, is the pain of going to the gym 3 times a week, of changing your nutrition, of changing your lifestyle, of hiring a trainer and putting the work in on a consistent basis, is that pain worth it? Is that pain worth the pleasure? The pleasure of achieving that goal is going to be higher than the pain of what you're going to go through. And that is just ultimately delayed gratification. Is it worth going through a little bit of pain now for a long-term gain? And when you come in with that mindset, that investment mindset, and that mindset of delayed gratification, you're more likely to achieve the goals that you're looking to achieve. But the number one thing that you need to come in with, look, we as coaches, and I'm talking fitness here because that's what we do, we can tell you the best nutrition plan for you. We can tell you the best training plan for you. I can show you the best technique for a squat, a bench press, a deadlift. None of that matters if you cannot give us the one thing that we can't coach you. And the one thing we cannot coach is that desire, that determination, and that eye of the tiger. And if you've seen the movie Rocky, one of the reasons why Sylvester Stallone's character Rocky Balboa was so successful or overcame so many odds in those films was because he had this so-called eye of the tiger. And this eye of the tiger was literally that desire and that hunger to achieve greatness despite the odds. And that's one of the reasons why I love that movie so much, because it's all about overcoming the odds. He was like I just moved the camera. He was like a massive underdog, right? So it's really, that's the one thing that we cannot give you, that eye of the tiger. I mean, I remember myself, right, when I first started out, I don't know if not many people know this anymore, but I used to, when I first started out my fitness journey, I was really, really hungry to become successful in something fitness related. And I chose kickboxing and Thai boxing as my avenue because I just wanted to prove to myself and I wanted to prove to people around me that I could achieve something. And I really was determined to do whatever it took, to make whatever sacrifices, to work as hard as I could, to be as disciplined as I could to achieve greatness in that sport. And anybody that knows me in that period of time, when I was from the ages of 18 to say about 35, I stopped fighting and I stopped training competitively at around 35, 36, and that's when I started this business. But anybody that knows me during that period of my life will tell you just how determined and how disciplined I was. I'd like to still think that I still am determined and disciplined, but in a different avenue now, more so to help other people in my business and my coaching as opposed to my own sporting prowess. But I had something that nobody could teach me, and I'm not trying to big myself up here, but one thing I remember a lot of my coaches and people that I used to train with used to always tell me is, Fahad, you've got heart, man. Like, I had heart. Like, you could put me in wars in those rings, and even though I wasn't the best, technically I wasn't the best fighter, I wasn't the most gifted fighter, I didn't have a background which would warrant me being a fighter. I came from a very comfortable Gujarati background, right? It's like not something that comfortable Gujarati kids do. So but one thing I did have is I had that absolute determination and desire to do whatever it took and put myself through whatever hell I needed to put myself through. And one thing I knew is the one thing I could control. I couldn't control how technically gifted I was. I couldn't control how skillful I was. I couldn't control many things, but one thing I could control is I could control the amount of output I gave in the gym, the amount of effort I gave in the gym and beyond the gym as well. And nobody in my mind was going to put more into that than me. I would train harder than anyone in the gym, and outside of the gym I would make sure I was more disciplined than any of my colleagues outside of the gym as well. So when they were out drinking, when they were out eating junk, I was at home eating clean. And yeah, I sacrificed a lot for these goals. And did I achieve the goals that I set out to? No, I didn't, but it made me who I am today. So that is really the one thing that you have to bring to the table. We can't bring that to the table for you. You've got to find out why it's got to be so important for you to achieve this goal. So if you're really hell-bent on achieving a goal, you've got to know why. The pain of the process has to be less than the desire of achieving the goal. And that's something only you can come up with. So if you're struggling right now for motivation, if you're struggling right now to stay committed to your goals, if you're struggling to see the results, and look, some of you guys listening to this say to me that you're doing whatever it takes to achieve your goals, but you're not. Right? If you hand on heart tell me you're doing everything that you can do to achieve your goals, you would have achieved your goals. Some of you, given the time that you've been training, you would have achieved your goals by now. But the reason you haven't is there are certain things that you're still finding uncomfortable to do consistently and on a regular basis, because the pain of doing those things is more than the desired result, the pleasure of the desired result. And you just haven't figured that equation out yet. So one thing you can do is, if you are stuck, or if you are struggling, if you are lacking motivation and you want to move forward, get your notebooks out, decide what you want, find out why it's important to you, figure out how much pleasure that thing will give you when you achieve that goal, and the pain of not achieving that goal has to be bigger. It has to be bigger than the pain of putting yourself through the process. And again, Tony Robbins did this at UPW. It was brilliant. It was called the Dickens effect. And listen, if you have the chance to go to UPW, go to it. It's an amazing event. I can't remember when the next one is. I think it's in October in Germany or somewhere like that. But just Google UPW Tony Robbins and find out when the next event is. It's really worth going to. And transformation will come when you understand those things. Right. I hope that this video and this podcast has given you insight and information to help you get out there and achieve your goals. If this podcast or video, however you're consuming this, gave you value, please like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, tag your friends, give us a 5-star review on Google. We'd really appreciate that. However you want to give back to us, that'd be really cool. I appreciate every one of you. And if you have any questions or concerns, or you want me to cover anything else in the future video, just give me a shout and I will do that. But until next time, have a great day. Take care. I'll see you soon.